Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Yellow Gloves podcast. I'm your host Chris, and today we're going to be recapping and breaking down the Cage Warriors 148 card, which took place on New Year's Eve. I guess before we start looking at the fights, I should probably wish you all a very happy new year. We had a pretty special night on New Year's Eve. It was the first New Year's Eve card in quite a few years. I can't remember the last time that Cage Warriors did one, though the most iconic is the one in 2012, of course, where Conor McGregor became the 2-weight Cage Warriors champion by beating Ivan Bushinga in Dublin. This card probably won't go down as an iconic card, though it was good. I don't think many things will ever come close to that Cage Warriors 51 card 10 years ago. So I guess we should probably start with an overview of how the card went. It was a pretty exciting card overall. A lot of finishes, not so many interesting bouts in terms of something that's balanced with some interesting decisions, though there were definitely some fights that kind of fell under that definition, but there weren't many, right? It was a pretty explosive card, some, highlight reel finishes, but if you were following, you noticed there was a lot of time where, though Cage Warriors is paced phenomenally well and probably the best in the world in terms of pacing for my money, there were some moments where we were kind of just feeling the dead air. I mean, they played the documentary that they did, also called The Yellow Gloves, no relation to this podcast. Felt like they played the entire documentary at one point on the broadcast. I don't know if that was intentional or just something to fill some dead air. The card was good for a New Year's Eve card. Prior to that, we had the Rising card in the day, and obviously you can't compare the two. But this definitely held up as something that was interesting, at least. I guess we should really start with the main event, and we'll work our way down through the card. So, in the main event, 4th round knockout win for Modestas Bukauskas over Chuck Campbell. I'm really, really impressed with Modestas Bukauskas and the way that he's managed to come back from that devastating injury that he faced against Khalil Roundtree. I always felt that he was a bit hard done by the UFC, and I know some folks have differing opinions on Bukauskas' talent and quality, but I really do think for a shallow division that the UFC have, the 205-pound division, it felt harsh to cut a guy who, albeit yes, 1-3, he was thrown in there with some wolves, right? Like, let's be honest. I mean, he beats Andreas Michailidis in his UFC debut. He was supposed to fight Vinicius Moreira on that night, but it never really happened. He knocked out Michailidis. Well, it was a bit of a weird stoppage. Michailidis, the round ends, he's a bit rattled, goes to sit down on his stool, but the stool isn't there, falls through the cage. They open the cage door. It was a mess, right? But Bukauskas had his number. And then 3 months later takes on Jimmy Crute. We all know how dangerous Jimmy Crute can be. Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, in my opinion, Bukauskas won that fight, and he should really be 2-2 in the UFC. 1-3 was always a bit harsh when you look at that fight. It was a very, very contentious decision. Not a robbery, I don't think. Definitely a competitive fight, but enough that I think you could have kept Bukauskas if you were the UFC. And, it took him a while to come back. It took him 13, 14 months to return from his knee injury. It was a pretty gruesome injury from everything I've heard and everything I've seen. And when Bukauskas returned in November last year, he fought Lee Chadwick, who, anyone who listens to this, if you're a UK MMA fan, you know Lee Chadwick. He's fought everywhere. And Chadwick is tough. He's not a crazily great fighter, of course, but he's tough. And when Bukauskas returned in November, it was a little bit underwhelming from him, though understandable because he'd been out for 13 months. You could see a lot of hesitance in the way he was attacking. Bukauskas is a very kick-heavy fighter, stance switching, a lot of spinning attacks, a lot of power that he generates. He's got quite a thick lower body. A lot of his power comes from his lower half, right? So to have that knee injury obviously impacted his game. He beat Chadwick in November. It was a decision. It was a comfortable decision, I'd say, but it didn't look like Modestas Bukauskas. So when they announced that he was fighting for the light heavyweight title, obviously there was some excitement there for a lot of us. Bukauskas never really lost his belt. He captured the light heavyweight belt in, 2019, I want to say. He beats Martin Hamlet for the belt, then defends against Ricardo Nosiglia, and then joins the UFC not long after. So it's a belt that he never actually lost. It was a belt that was vacated. And Cage Warriors didn't really do anything with a 205-pound belt since he was gone, right? There weren't any title matches for it. Before I go into the fight, I just want to give my 2 cents on the matchup, because I, d- I don't think Chuck Campbell is a great fighter by any stretch of the imagination, right? He's a very raw MMA fighter. He's very tall, very gangly. He's got a pretty considerable reach. His time in Cage Warriors has been all right, to be fair. Like he beats Elijah Harris, Cage Warriors 133 back in March, and then the card in November was just insane. Absolutely decimated Andy Clamp, who's a pretty good prospect in the UK MMA scene. Hit him with a nasty, nasty left hook, ground and pound finish, and it was enough to get him a title shot. As I said, Chuck Campbell is raw. He's not an impressive fighter by any stretch of the imagination, and I couldn't quite tell you what type of a fighter Chuck Campbell is, so much as he's just a dangerous fighter on the feet. He doesn't have a deep arsenal in terms of his striking tool set. He's not an entirely convincing grappler. So the excitement for this fight was more about, could we see Modestas Bukauskas return to his best form and his way of fighting, and I'm happy to report, for anyone who didn't watch the fight, though I imagine most of you did, Modestas Bukauskas was absolutely incredible. I mean, first round, he starts, I think the first attack he throws, if I can remember, was just a spinning back kick, and immediately I was like, well, this is Modestas Bukauskas back to his brilliant best. And it continued from there, right? He looked really, really loose on the feet, very, very confident. He was drawing Campbell out in the first round with a lot of feints. Campbell was biting on literally everything that Bukauskas was feinting. A lot of stance switching as well, which is part of what made Bukauskas such an interesting prospect to begin with back in 2019. I mean, he's a light heavyweight that doesn't really move like a light heavyweight. He's very explosive, and we saw that against Chuck Campbell, which made me really, really happy. Campbell looked frozen in the first round. He looked like there was no offense. I mean, I'd be shocked if he threw more than 10 strikes in that round. I'd have to go back and count them. But Bukauskas looked like he spent a lot of the first round kind of downloading some data on Campbell and the way that Campbell fights and operates. And, after the first round, I thought, okay, this is Bukauskas' fight to lose. But I really wanted to see him get a finish. It had been a while since he got a finish. I mean, it really was that Mihailidis fight back in 2020 when Mihailidis falls through the cage door. Since then, it's 4 fights without a finish. He's back in the win column, but I wanted to see Modestas Bukauskas at his best. And in the second round, Campbell, I don't know if there was something in the team talk. The broadcast didn't really show it, but you could hear Campbell's corner kind of egging him on the entirety of the first round, the beginning of the second, telling him, "Come on, Campbell, or Chuck, you can do this." A lot of positive words were being thrown at Campbell. I don't know if that's probably the way he reacts best. It did seem a bit weird that he was being praised or being encouraged for doing very little, but I think it worked to an extent in the second round. I think Campbell, immediately went into a clinch and tried to grapple with Bukauskas and take him down as well. But I think immediately you saw the grappling, the difference in grappling between the two. Bukauskas was solid defensively, very strong, and immediately reversed all of those clinch positions, started landing some really, really nice knees. And Campbell did open up towards the end of the round. We had the two of them trading these wild shots, and immediately I thought, well, one of these guys is going to sleep in the second round. But it went through to the end, and the third round wasn't much to write home about. Campbell went back to being quite frozen, reacting to everything that Bukauskas did. A lot of Bukauskas' stance switching was working. His jab was immense throughout the night. I wouldn't say Bukauskas' jab has ever been anything that stood out to me. Definitely more of a kicker and someone that just has solid hands and good power, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. But I think his jab was really good. It was disorientating Campbell just a little. He didn't seem to really have an answer for a lot of the pawing jabs of Bukauskas or really anything, right? I think that was the theme of the fight. And then third round, it was just a lot of Bukauskas just teeing off on Campbell, getting some good shots in. And then in that fourth round, seconds into the fourth round, Bukauskas just clips him with a peach of a right hand. He does this great thing where he throws the left jab, and just as he's throwing the left jab, the right hook's coming over, gets Campbell right. I think it gets him just behind the ear and floors him, right? Completely face planted. And Bukauskas didn't even have to go for a second shot. It was a straight up knockout. Mark Goddard, who was refereeing the fight, did not need to tell Bukauskas to stop. I mean, it was more or less a walk-off knockout, if ever I've seen one. And I think the coolest part of the fight was seeing Bukauskas do his backflip after winning, knowing everything he's gone through with those knee injuries, or with that knee injury. it's a feel good moment, right? And I think Cage Warriors has had a lot of feel good moments this year. I think Bukauskas will be happy with his performance. I mean, he seemed chuffed from everything that I've seen online and his interviews. He had an interview before the fight where he said that his knee is completely bulletproof now and that it's more of a weapon than a hindrance. And it definitely felt that way. I think if there were any cobwebs after that Lee Chadwick fight, that they're certainly gone now. Chuck Campbell had nothing for him, and looking back, it was probably a bit of a crappy matchup for Bukauskas in terms of competitiveness, right? It's not someone that was going to push him, but I think it's good to get him back in the win column. And I mean, what is Bukauskas? He's what, 28? I wouldn't be surprised if there's another UFC run in this guy. Like I said, it's a shallow division that the UFC have. Bukauskas is going to keep knocking people out. He's going to keep doing that, and he's going to keep dominating. And I wouldn't be surprised if he gets the shot again. But I'm really happy for him. A really good feel good story on this card. And I guess we should start moving down to the rest of the card. This was a Team Europe versus Team USA thing that Cage Warriors did. I don't think it was very well marketed, I guess. I was interested in it at the beginning. It's always cool when we have these themes of team something versus team something else. But actually it didn't feel like they got the craziest US talent. They got some cool guys from their talent pool that they've been building up with those San Diego shows. But it wasn't an insanely stacked card, though the matchups were pretty good. Team Europe won 3-2 on the night, so Team USA only managed to grab 2 wins of the 5 matchups, and their final win actually came in the co-main event, which was Wilson Hayes versus Thomas Gronval. Anyone who knows Wilson Hayes will remember him as a UFC title challenger. He's now in Cage Warriors, and he's 37 or 38 years old. Wilson Hayes was brilliant in this fight. I mean, Gronval is a prospect from Finland. He's a decent enough fighter, but I was just so pleased to see Wilson Hayes win. I always love seeing the older Brazilian fighters manage to gut out a win against a prospect. It's a running theme in MMA, and it's always fun to see that happen. Wilson Hayes was just, first round. I think Gronval was powerful in the grappling exchanges. Hayes was always going to beat him for technique, I think, but Gronval seemed to back himself offensively. And Hayes definitely struggled in that first round. I thought Gronval definitely won the first, controlled Hayes on the ground. But you could see that it was power over technique. And I felt that if this is the best that Gronval had to offer, he would taper off once the fight got into the latter stages, and you saw that, right? Wilson Hayes immediately in the second round went for the body lock takedown, got him down, and practically kept him down for the rest of the round. Gronval was decent defensively. I don't think Hayes was doing much to actually get a finish. There wasn't a crazy amount of submission attempts, despite transitioning to the back a few times. Third round, more of the same, right? There isn't much to say about this fight. Wilson Hayes just dominated the latter 2 rounds. Gronval's a pretty cool prospect. I think he was just here to fill up the card. Hayes definitely someone to keep an eye on in Cage Warriors, just in terms of being one of those savvy veterans that at any point, if Cage Warriors want to build a bantamweight up off his name, you're going to see that happen, right? Expect to see Hayes fight in the new year against some of the better bantamweights as a way of funneling them into the UFC. And we know that Cage Warriors have a good relationship with the UFC and almost operate as a really good kind of feeder organization for the UFC. And I think anyone getting a win over Hayes, being able to say that they beat a former UFC title challenger, is something that's going to be of benefit to the Cage Warriors fighters and to Cage Warriors as an organization. But yeah, that fight, there wasn't much to write home about. Hayes was brilliant. He was dominant. No finish there, but it was the last win that Team USA would get. It did take us 2-2 into the main event, but obviously Modestas Bukauskas did the thing and beat Chuck Campbell pretty handily. Tobias Harila versus Damon Wilson. I mean, it was the people's main event, right? Before the fight started and after the fact, what a fight between these two. And it's no real surprise. Everyone I saw online, from Brad Walton, Cage Warriors commentator, who I hold in really, really high regard, and all of the media, Severe MMA, everyone just talking up this fight, and rightly so. Damon Wilson's a pretty cool prospect out of the US, and one of those guys that we've seen kind of come through that San Diego scene that Cage Warriors are building up. Was 5-0 going into this fight. Four of his wins were in Cage Warriors as well. All finishes. You know, he had that doctor stoppage with that nasty knee against James Settle, and then a bunch of first and second round finishes. Tobias Harila, I don't know what to say about Tobias Harila. I really think he's just the most insane fighter probably in Cage Warriors. After the fight, I tweeted that he's probably the primary madman in MMA. I think you'd struggle to find a crazier active fighter than Tobias Harila. Someone who can grapple, has a really good grappling pedigree. Every fight is just like, nah, I don't want to grapple. I just want to, beat the snot out of people. And there's something to be appreciated about that style. His walkout was brilliant. He had a purge steamed walkout. That clown mask is always terrifying and really kind of sets the mood for a Tobias Harila fight. There was so much that was cool about this fight, right? Like Damon Wilson starts off immediately grappling heavy. I thought personally, I thought Damon Wilson would want to strike a bit more with Tobias Harila, just because that's what this fight was billed as, a potential kind of barn burner, and there were good moments. It was definitely a cracking fight, but I think Damon Wilson wanted the win more than anything else, right? So Wilson started off the round really, really wrestling heavy. It was smart to stick to the grappling against someone like Harila. You really want to nullify all of that janky striking arsenal that he has. The knees up the middle, the elbows, and boy, will we talk about elbows in just a minute. But Wilson did a good job, right? He stifled Harila quite well. Had really some nice uppercuts. Did Wilson in the clinch in that fight, primarily in the first round. Just sneaking them in. Harila's never going to be the most defensively sound guy, right? So you're going to find a way to hit him, and Damon Wilson was finding a way to hit him in that first round. There was a point where Harila started, or Wilson started bleeding quite considerably, but it was never really obvious to me what exactly he got hit with. It might have been a sneaky little elbow from Harila, as he so often does, but I mean, the uppercuts were the story of that first round, and I thought the pace that Damon Wilson was putting on Harila, I really started to think that we could be in for a bit of a an upset with Damon Wilson winning. But I mean, that second round was just insane, right? Like Damon Wilson comes out in the second round, smothering pressure again, like just trying to nullify everything that Harila does. And he was doing it quite well until Harila gets his mojo going up against the fence, hits Wilson with a really, really nice body shot. And what do most people do when they get hit to the body? They start to draw their hands down to protect the midsection. And Harila, being the savvy, violent madman that he is, sees Wilson drop his hands and drills him with a really, really insane elbow. Gets him right on the temple. And that was it for Damon Wilson, right? He tried to get up, fight, really, really good stoppage. I'm really glad it got stopped when it did, because Harila would have wailed on Wilson. Wilson tries to get up, protest the stoppage, and immediately just starts falling backwards and stumbling around the cage. He was definitely out, definitely done for. Tobias Harila isn't going to win any belts, guys. He's not going to be a champion. He's not going to end up in the UFC, I don't think. He's not that kind of fighter. I just think for regional level, Tobias Harila he's special, right? Like, he is just a crazy fighter, and a real luxury for Cage Warriors to have. You can put him up against anyone who's willing to scrap with him, and you're going to get something good. Even if he loses, like he did against Samuel Bart earlier on in the year, you're going to get something really, really interesting from him. His reluctance to grapple offensively when he's a pretty good grappler is always hilarious. I love seeing this guy fight, and I thought, for it being billed the people's main event, it definitely delivered. It's probably, I wouldn't say it's the most memorable moment from the card, because I think we'll get to that when we move down to the prelims. But Tobias Harila is awesome, and I think that the more you watch this guy fight, the more you just fall in love with his style. Defensively, all over the place, but offensively, he's just a juggernaut, and he's got so many tools and so many awkward angles that he strikes from. He's in that same mold as Fleminas, for example. Just these guys that have a very, very awkward striking arsenal that just are able to generate power out of the weirdest strikes, right? So that was Harila Wilson. I really, really enjoyed the fight. And now moving on, we've got Darren Stewart versus Guilherme Cadena. Darren Stewart, another guy who, much like Bukauskas, has had a lot of adversity. And I think if there was a theme to this fight, or a theme, to this card, it's definitely comebacks and feel good stories are plenty. Darren Stewart's a fighter who I've always held in pretty high regard, and I think his record kind of betrays just how good he is. 13-9, yes, but I really, really liked him when he was in Cage Warriors initially, and I thought his UFC run was really, really good, right? He's a kill or be killed type of fighter. We know that about Darren Stewart. But I think once people realize just how devastatingly powerful the guy can be, it became very, very evident that the way to beat Darren Stewart is to grapple him. And I don't think Stewart's ever developed good defensive grappling, though I think his offensive grappling is super, super underrated. You saw him, out grapple in that third round against Kevin Holland back when he was in the UFC. You saw him win some grappling exchanges with Holland, who's a Travis Lutter black belt and is a really, really good fighter. You saw him dominate offensively in that round. I know Holland's not, a great example of a good defensive grappler, but someone who can grapple at a decent level. Darren Stewart had a pretty poor run in the UFC after that Holland fight. A fight where it was a split decision. I don't think Stewart won, but, an argument could be there that he did. Has that no contest of Eric Anders where he takes the illegal knee. They rematch the fight. Anders beats him. Jacoby knocks him out. And then that's the end of Stewart's UFC run. I don't think it was a harsh cut from the UFC. I mean, Stewart's always going to give you action. But if you put him in there with a grappler, you're going to get a lot of dull fights, right? So what do Cage Warriors do? They signed Darren Stewart, and then pretty much a year later, after a few bout cancellations, they put him in there with Mick Stanton. That fight back in July summarized everything that had become bad about Darren Stewart's game, right? It's the offensive grappling's awesome from him, defensive grappling just entirely porous. Stanton was a huge underdog going into that fight, and Darren Stewart literally rolled over for him, really. It wasn't, I think there have been some mental blocks with Darren. If you see him on social media, he's always trying to improve mentally. He's got personal kind of mental coaches and everything, which I think most fighters should have anyways, because it's such a volatile sport. And the Stanton fight for me was just poor from Stewart. He got dominated, and there was a part of me that thought that, yeah, I think that was the end of Stewart for me. I thought, I don't know that he's there mentally anymore. He seems quite shot, seemed to have given up against Stanton once he realized he couldn't get back up. And boy, did Darren Stewart shut me up and a lot of people. And I say that as a Darren Stewart fan, right? Comes in New Year's Eve against Guillermo Cadena. First round was everything you like to see from Darren Stewart. He was, had that nice kind of wide stance, a good little bounce as well. Cadena's a vet, right? Cadena's fought, that was his 50th professional fight. The guy had 16 fights in 2018. That's 16 mixed martial arts fights. I mean, that's Eagle of Chanchin numbers, right? That's 90s MMA numbers. And he's a primary grappler. And I thought, though, from what I'd seen of Cadena, though I'm not really well versed in Cadena's game, I could tell he's a very good kind of jiu-jitsu specialist, but not a great takedown artist like we often see with BJJ specialists. And I thought, well, if Stewart can avoid as much as possible getting taken down, he's probably gonna do some damage, or if he's able to get on top, right? It wasn't so much about getting taken down, it was so much about being able to get on top. And Darren Stewart did exactly that. It was vintage Darren Stewart, gets on top of Cadena, jumped into his guard, which I found interesting. He drops him early in the first round, jumps straight into Cadena's guard. Immediately, sirens are going off in my head, like Stewart's silly and he's going to get triangled. And, there is a moment there where Cadena does throw up a bit of a kind of armbar, has the triangle in as well. Not much that troubled Stewart. Stewart kind of shifts his legs to the side, and then what do you get from Darren Stewart? Massive, massive ground and pound elbows. To no surprise, if you've seen Stewart fight, you know exactly what he's like from those top positions. And the ground and pound was nasty, right? I think he lands in total, it's probably 2 elbows, but it's the amount of power he generates. First one just catches Cadena on the temple. Second one shatters his orbital, because the minute it lands, Cadena just starts grabbing his eye in agony, and the referee stops the fight. It's awesome to see Darren Stewart back in winning ways, and you saw just how much it meant to him. I think fighters jumping out of the cage and celebrating with fans is can be a bit kind of vapid sometimes. I don't think it has the emotion that fighters think it sometimes has. Like, when Aldo did it, it was iconic, and Molly doing it in UFC London was pretty cool. But, with Darren, you could tell it came out of pure emotion, and he jumps out of the cage celebrating with fans and probably friends and family. It was a special moment, and it was a bit of an emotional one. If you followed Darren for a while, he's he wears his heart on his sleeve. He's will be the first person to tell you if he's had a shit performance. And he'll be the first person to tell you that he needs to go in there, knock the next guy out. And he did exactly that with Guillermo Cadena. Like I keep saying, Stewart's a guy who runs straight off confidence. And it wouldn't surprise me if he makes a push for gold. Moving on to the what was the first fight of the main card, Dario Belandi versus Justin Barry. This fight was definitely interesting. I think Belandi comes in as a massive underdog, from what I could recall. Justin Barry's got this a bit of hype around him. He's got 2 crescent kick KOs. He's coming off that Cage Warriors San Diego circuit. A pretty vicious striker with some awesome kind of weird kicking game. He's got the crescent kicks, the spinning hook kicks. One of your kind of Taekwondo guys, but someone who can, from what I've seen, mix it up as well with the grappling. And I think one thing to say about this fight before we actually go in and break it down was Dario Belandi's Italian, as we all know, and Italians have run Cage Warriors this year. The card that Cage Warriors did in Italy was phenomenal, and it's one of the cards of the year. But Italian fighters in Cage Warriors this year have been incredible. We've had some of the best performances have come from Italian fighters. We've had title wins from Italian fighters. We've had crazy knockouts, crazy submissions. And Dario Belandi, I guess, is just another product of that great talent pool that Cage Warriors have in Italy. I think Cage Warriors have always had a good pool of Italian fighters, but I think right now you're starting to see probably the fruits of Cage Warriors' labor and developing talent in Italy. And I think Dario Belandi's probably another one of those guys, right? Didn't know a crazy amount about him coming into his Cage Warriors career, but he's done really well for himself so far. First round, and it only lasted a round, was quite interesting, right? Like Justin Barry comes in, usual kick heavy Taekwondo style, drops Belandi pretty early into the fight. Immediately you're thinking that's it for Belandi. Justin Barry, huge Cage Warriors card. He's got his marquee win. He's got another highlight reel finish. This guy's, destined for big things. And Dario Belandi somehow survives getting dropped, which was really, really impressive, and gets back to his feet and just guts out the rest of the round. Hits Justin Barry with a really, really nasty shot. Gets him down to the ground. Uncontested ground and pound. Justin Barry has nothing for him. I think what caused some issues for Barry was definitely that the strike that dropped him definitely broke his nose. And you could tell actually when they separated the fighters and when they were announcing the winner, Justin Barry's nose looked a little bit crooked. And I think Dario Belandi just gutted out the performance, right? It felt like one of those fights, or at least for me, I went into it expecting Barry to get his highlight reel win. And what I got out of it was Dario Belandi gutting out a performance and managing to get a finish on Barry. Really, really good comeback win. I'm really excited to see what Dario Belandi can do in Cage Warriors. I think we'll see more of Justin Barry. It's definitely not the end of Justin Barry. Dario Belandi probably one to keep an eye on in 2023. And now we get to probably my favorite part of the pod, which is the breakdown for Sam Creasey versus Shajidul Haque. I loved this fight the minute it got booked. I'm a huge Sam Creasey fan, huge Shaj fan. These guys are awesome 125ers in the UK MMA scene and in Europe in general. Shaj has been doing some amazing work outside of the UK, actually, on the European circuit. And Creasey, I mean, we talk about feel-good moments. How about when Creasey won the belt after, challenging 3 times for it, losing, and then eventually getting that belt? That was an incredible moment. It feels like Shaj has been an uncrowned champ for a while. Probably should have gotten this shot a lot sooner. I know this fight fell through. It was supposed to happen a few months before it did. It was a great fight. I thought Creasey was going to go in and do the business, and I didn't put much stock into their first fight. Shaj dominated their first fight, and I thought, well, it was 6 years ago. Shaj has improved a lot, but I think Creasey's definitely improved more as a fighter. I don't think it's harsh to say that Creasey is probably the better fighter out of the two, but when someone has your number, they have your number, right? 2016, Shaj takes Creasey's undefeated streak away from him. 2022 takes his belt from him as well. Just one of those moments where you just think, I don't think there's anything Creasey can do now to beat Shaj. It kind of, if you're a UFC fan, a little bit reminiscent of Izzy and Pereira, right? It's no matter how much Izzy tries, he's probably never going to get that win back against Pereira. And I think no matter how much Creasey tries, he's not going to get that win back against Shaj. But I do want to break down the fight just a little bit. I think, going into the fight, I thought Creasey would win. I thought Creasey would do the more damaging, would have the more damaging shots, on the feet. And it really wasn't the case. He definitely in the first round and in the second round as well, to be fair, Creasey was winning the fight. He came into it very, very fast. Creasey's usually a bit of a slow starter, likes to read his opponent's game, throws a lot of feints out there, will take a few shots just to kind of see what patterns his opponent is throwing out in terms of striking. But we didn't get a lot of that from Creasey, and I don't know if there was a kind of a rushed nature to his game. It definitely worked in the first two rounds. I think he was swarming Shaj. He was quicker to the punch. In that first round, Shaj's jab immediately busts Creasey's nose open, right? Like Creasey's just bleeding pretty much from the start of the bell goes. And after that, really pretty much until the third round, Shaj couldn't really get his hands on Creasey. Creasey was super fast. He was in and out. His jab was brilliant. Jab into the body, jab into the head. It was really, really clean work. Shaj was for me, he was getting backed up, right? He was getting backed up pretty easily. And I don't know if that was part of his plan, was to be the one doing the downloading of the data, but it seemed to me, those first two rounds, I thought, well, Creasey seems a bit like he's in a hurry. And he's probably going to take Shaj out in the first three rounds. But Shaj kept going. He was getting outpaced in that first round. Manages to get a nice takedown to end the round. Obviously, nowhere near enough to be impactful by way of a judge's scorecard, right? But it was at least something offensively for him because he really couldn't get his hands on Creasey. Creasey had a nice butterfly guard to get back to his feet, which was pretty nifty. You feel like Shaj is probably the better offensive grappler of the two. Creasey's got some good subs, but Shaj has really, really good top control. So it was quite telling for me at the end of the first round because I thought Creasey's got him for pace. Seems like he's got him on the grappling. He seems savvy enough. And I really thought this was going to be Creasey's night. Second round, I think even before we go into the second round, there was a moment in between rounds where Shaj is getting ice on his back, the usual kind of lark for a fighter. And Shaj asks to have ice put on his knee. And I think commentary team picked up on it brilliantly. And you just thought, if Creasey comes out and starts targeting that knee, we could be in for a quick finish here. And what does Creasey do? Pretty much first strike of the second round, goes straight to kicking that knee, straight to kicking that lead leg. You love to see when a fighter does that. Probably sound like a bit of a degenerate saying that, but if you're an MMA fan, we're all probably a bunch of weirdos anyways. If someone's injured, you love to see someone target that injury. And Creasey did that, right? But it didn't seem to bother Shaj too much. Maybe we read into it a little bit. It'd be interesting to see from Shaj's end actually how much that knee was bothering him. I haven't seen any quotes or any interviews after the fact. I'm sure we'll hear more in the coming weeks once he finishes celebrating and starts doing some interviews. But yeah, Creasey, same thing. Second round, pace, rapid uppercuts from Creasey in the second, just beating Shaj to every punch. Shaj was throwing some good stuff, but Creasey was just dipping out of range and just clocking Shaj. Uppercuts were clean, shots to the body were nice. There's a moment towards the end of the second round where Creasey just starts flurrying, has Shaj up against the fence. He's not landing clean, but it's enough to swarm Shaj and to deny Shaj any moments of striking. And yeah, like I keep saying, first and second round, I'm watching that and I'm thinking, Creasey's going to retain his belt, and what a year for Sam Creasey, potentially Cage Warriors Fighter of the Year. For my money, potentially could have been, but third round, change of story, right? Creasey started to slow down considerably in the third round, and I don't know how many people picked up on this, but immediately, we're talking about pace from Creasey, first and second round. Third round, where has the pace gone? Immediately, you just start to see. I don't think he was gassed, but I think he probably thought, all right, I need to conserve my energy here because this probably is going to go all the way. We're probably going to have 5 rounds of this. I think it was a grave mistake from Creasey. I don't know if it's a physical thing. Maybe he thought he couldn't push that pace for 5 rounds. But the minute he took his foot off the gas, you can't do that against Shaj. Shaj is a grinder. He's a tough fighter. And we saw it, right? Like Shaj started to land a little bit more. Calf kicks, 1, 2, 3, few more calf kicks. Creasey, the speed difference just wasn't there anymore. Shaj was just starting to land. And then we get probably, definitely a contender for Cage Warriors knockout of the year. Shaj finds a little spot, ducks out of the way of a few punches from Creasey, and then sets up just behind his jab, similar actually to Bukauskas' finish. Shaj finds a little pocket for a jab, doesn't land it all the way, but enough to get Creasey to react. And just as Creasey reacts, overhand right, one punch knockout, absolutely devastating. Creasey was out. You could tell from his face. It was one of those knockouts that visually is just looks horrible. Really, really good stoppage as well. I think Rich Mitchell was refereeing that fight. I do like Rich. I think he's a pretty good referee. Sometimes will let fights go on a bit longer than they should. And I think here he actually made a perfect call. You could tell the way Creasey's body just tightened up. He was completely out of it. One of the knockouts of the year from Shaj, and what a story, right? Like, again, one of the veterans of the UK MMA scene, one of the best flyweights we've had in the UK. Shaj is incredible, and I think a well-deserving 5-fight win streak. It was nice to see him come back to Cage Warriors after having all those fights in AFC, Almighty Fighting Championship. Had the win against Fadine in Aries FC. It's really impressive what Shaj has done. I think he's had some rough moments in Cage Warriors. I mean, he lost to Hadley. That was his fight prior to this one. Incredible moment for Shaj. Getting on a bit. He's 32 years old. Are we going to see him in the UFC? Probably not. But I think in terms of what he's managed to achieve in his career, I think this is the crowning achievement so far. So many matchups that I can't wait to see him have at 125 in Cage Warriors. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he fights Creasey again down the line. Just based off the fact that Creasey was winning the fight until he got knocked out. Cage Warriors love a rematch, love doing having storylines running through as all the best promotions do. So it wouldn't surprise me if these two fought again down the line. It was a shame to see Creasey lose. You've got to really appreciate what Creasey has done in Cage Warriors. Really impressed with him. Just wasn't his night, and I think taking his foot off the gas was exactly what hurt him on the night. Shaj, brilliant. Hats off to Shaj. One of the performances to remember from this card, just of the fact that he took everything that Creasey had, waited and waited, chipped away at the lead leg, and then when the moment came, massive overhand right to finish the fight. All right, and now we're gonna kind of, I guess, speed run through these prelims because prelims were really quick, and we had some decisions, but the next fight was really quick. Chasen Blair versus Elio Hernandez. This was the first Team Europe versus Team USA fight on the card. Chasen Blair. There's really nothing to say about this fight. 12 seconds in, knockout. Easy for Chasen Blair. Super easy. That's his fourth win. He's 4-1 now. All 5 of his fights have actually been under the Cage Warriors banner. I was really impressed with Chasen Blair for the 12 seconds that he made an appearance on this card. It was a brutal knockout. Really good finish. Elio Hernandez just punished for throwing that naked leg kick. You see it so much in MMA. You watch kickboxing or you watch other kind of Muay Thai or something like that. It's baffling to me that it's 2022 or 2023 now, and guys are still throwing naked leg kicks. Man, they're still getting caught off these naked leg kicks. They're putting nothing behind it, nothing to threaten upstairs. They're just throwing it. And Chasen Blair, who's predominantly a wrestler, right, and does a lot of his crazy finishes on the ground with some ground and pound, just sees the naked leg kick coming from a mile away and punishes it with a really clean, thunderous right hook that just sends Elio Hernandez to sleep. I'd actually never seen Elio Hernandez fight. I don't think we probably won't see him again in Cage Warriors. I think he's just one of those guys that you get to feed to a prospect, and that's exactly what that was. 12-second knockout, one of the fastest knockouts in Cage Warriors history. So props to Chasen Blair. Cannot wait to see him fight again. I imagine he'll be on that San Diego card in March. Then we had Emra Sonmez versus Adam Meschini. Emra Sonmez was excellent in this fight. He's been a grinder for years, 14-4. We know exactly what type of fighter Sonmez is. He's gonna grapple, he's gonna clinch, he's gonna make fights nasty, make them uncomfortable. I think Meschini was the favorite going into this fight. More of a prospect than Sonmez, without a doubt. Meschini has a nice kind of striking game, really clean boxing, really good kicks, but Sonmez took all of that and said, well, we're not going to be punching or kicking anytime soon. Struggles a little bit in the first round to get Meschini down. A lot of clinching, a lot of grappling up against the fence. Second and third round, just has his way with Moschini, just totally bullies him. 30-27, probably a 30-26 in there. I know one of the judges gave a 30-26. I don't think Sonmez did enough for me, but just a very, very dominant grappling display from Emre Sonmez. And then we had Nathan Fletcher versus Alessandro Giordano. Actually, talking about Italian fighters being impressive, it's a shame here Giordano was not able to keep that theme going for the Italians in Cage Warriors this year. Nathan Fletcher just, you would have wanted to see Nathan Fletcher probably get a finish in this fight just because of how much of a highly touted prospect he is. But it's totally dominant performance. First round, Fletcher's jab is just a thing of beauty. Like, it's a piston of a jab. It's quick. It's lethal. He's landing at ease on Giordano. Starts to as well punish Giordano for some lazy kicks. We've spoken about naked leg kicks. Well, Giordano is trying to throw some stuff to the body. Last thing you want to do against a credible grappler like Nathan Fletcher, start throwing some kicks to the body without disguising it. The minute Giordano starts throwing to that midsection, Fletcher grabs the leg. First round, gets him down and just starts ground and pounding, trying to find his way to a submission. And, Fletcher's just tagging him over and over in that first round. Second round, more of the same, probably a more grappling dominant round from Fletcher. We didn't really get to see him work a lot on the feet. Giordano's defensively sound, I will give him that. Didn't allow himself to get caught in any submissions, but definitely some inabilities to get up. But I guess it's easier said than done when you're fighting a guy of Nathan Fletcher's quality. Giordano was actually sound on the feet when they got to the feet at the end of the second and definitely in the third. There was some moments for Giordano where you watch it and you think he's not incredibly outmatched on the feet. He does have some tools. Definitely probably had the power advantage, but I think that jab from Fletcher was just not allowing him to mount a crazy amount of combinations, right? Every time Giordano looked to threaten, Fletcher either had the grappling in the back pocket or he had that jab all day long. It was really, really like if you love striking in MMA, there's nothing I love more than jabs and strikes to the body, right? And I think a good jab in MMA is still so undervalued. Still aren't jabbing, even though we all fawn over jabs and we all love the jab in MMA. Not a lot of guys are doing it to a crazy, crazy level. I think Fletcher should be pretty happy with the way that jab's coming along. Really, really wicked, slick boxing combinations from Fletcher on the night. And the grappling was all there. And then, at the end of the third round, there is a bit of drama because, Fletcher, dominating as he is, actually manages to lose his position on the ground, and Giordano has a rear naked choke. Doesn't manage to sink it in at all. Doesn't actually manage to get the choke in. But there's a moment there in those last 10-15 seconds where you think, are we about to see one of the craziest comebacks of the year in Cage Warriors? But Fletcher guts it out, manages to get through, and he's now 7-1 and definitely one of the big prospects at 135 pounds. Probably someone you could match up with Wilson Hayes, actually. Emil Brown versus Junior Orgulio was a very, very interesting fight. Interesting is probably a bit nice towards Orgulio. I think it's interesting if you're an Emil Brown fan, which I am. Emil Brown is terrifying. This was a catch weight at 175 pounds. You could probably expect to see Emil Brown at 170, 185 for pretty much the entirety of his career. He is, pound for pound, one of the most devastating punchers in Cage Warriors. And I think what I really, really like about Emil Brown is not only is he a devastating knockout artist, he's also got a really, really nice submission game. Good front chokes. Like he's got a nice guillotine. He's got a really good anaconda. Like the way that he attacks the neck is pretty impressive for a guy who, you look at his physique and you look at his build and you think he's just going to be an explosive one punch knockout artist. And he is that, but he's also a nice, slick submission artist too. Orgulio's a veteran, 16-10. He's been around the block for sure. Definitely one of those fights where Emil Brown was supposed to win, but it's the manner in which Emil Brown does it, which is impressive, right? He drops him in the first round really easily, sinks in the guillotine, almost has Orgulio. Orgulio does really, really well to survive it. There is a little bit of fun in that first round because Orgulio almost gets a guillotine of his own later on in the round. They start swinging for the fences. It's probably one of the better rounds of the entire fight. If you haven't seen Cage Warriors 148, definitely a fight to go back and watch just for that first round. There are a few swings in momentum, but Emil Brown's just totally dominant overall. Emil Brown has this awesome moment to set up the finish. Right, he gets almost like a weird, I guess, standing front headlock or front choke on Orgulio, and you think, cool, he's going to snap the head down, he's going to take him down, and he's going to start doing his thing. Instead, gets him in that position and just knees Orgulio in the head. Immediately, Orgulio's knees buckle, falls to the ground. Definitely does a good job to survive, I would say. Emil Brown comes with that crushing ground and pound like you'd expect from him. Just really nasty elbows, very vicious punches. Another prospect to keep an eye on in Cage Warriors. And I think this, Emil Brown could be someone you'd expect to see maybe on like a Contender Series a year from now. Just devastating punches. One of those guys out of Team Renegade in Birmingham. They're one of the bigger gyms in the UK right now, and you saw Jai Herbert in his corner. He's destined for big things. Is Emil Brown, and I think if there's anyone you want to keep an eye on in 2023 for Cage Warriors that isn't one of your bigger names like a Luke Riley or something like that, I think Emil Brown is definitely your guy. Expect to see him quite active and finishing more people because he really is the real deal. All right, and that brings us to the final fight to discuss. Samuel Bark versus Orlando Wilson Prins. Samuel Bark, one of the coolest nicknames in the sport. It's probably silly to most people. Sam on Decker, obviously a tribute to the famous Ramon Decker, who's one of the greatest Muay Thai artists of all time, probably the greatest Muay Thai fighter that isn't from Thailand. Samuel Bark is a Muay Thai guy, especially very popular in Sweden, very good on the regional circuit in Muay Thai. Has transitioned to mixed martial arts since the back end of 2021, and what a year he had in 2022. Super active. The guy had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fights in 2022. This used to be the way MMA was many years ago, where people fighting 7 times in a year was nothing special. But in this day and age, it's pretty much something. And Samuel Bark is a finisher, but he's not someone that doesn't go to decision, right? So it's not like he's not having these tough fights. But God, what a year, right? What a year for Samuel Bark. It wasn't his most memorable performance, but he goes now 3-0 under the Cage Warriors banner. Beat Tobias Harila in July, beat Manny Akpan, who's an exceptional prospect, in November, and then beats Orlando Wilson Prins. If you've realized I'm not talking much about the fights because there isn't a crazy amount to talk about. Prins is a grappler, Bark is a striker. Bark weirdly goes into the fight with a very grappling heavy approach. Maybe I need to watch more of Bark outside of Cage Warriors, but I've always seen him as, a Muay Thai guy who will do a lot of nice work on the clinch. But in this fight, he was very much willing to take Prins down and try and work off the top. Despite not having many submissions in his game, I don't think he has a single submission win, and I've never really seen him threaten much with a submission. I take notes throughout these fights, and my notepad has the least amount of information for this fight. Bark did good work offensively with the grappling. Not enough to really dominate Prins. I think 29-28 was a very fair result. One of the judges gave it 30-27. Don't want to focus on that too much, but it seemed a bit of a naff scorecard for me when you look at the way that the fight was going. I think Prins definitely took the first round. Prins had Bark's back. There wasn't much damage either way. So, if you got to move to the secondary and tertiary scoring criteria, then Prins definitely wins that first round. Second and third is pretty. I'd say the second is the clearest round. Bark does a lot of nice work in this round. Narrowly misses with a spinning elbow at the end, which would have been typical Samuel Bark to get that finish. And then third round's more grappling. Prins has his moments, but it's nothing really to write home about. It's just one of those where you just have to applaud Samuel Bark for the year he's had. Another win. He's 3-0 in Cage Warriors. Manages to go 6-1 in 2022 across both Cage Warriors, UAE Warriors, and Superior Challenge. It's an interesting one with Samuel Bark. Clearly a decent enough grappler, which surprises me from a ground aspect, from a wrestling aspect. Clinch obviously comes as no surprise to anyone, but the grappling on the ground definitely a surprise. I don't know what 2023 will hold for him. He's a really interesting featherweight, really violent guy. We've done the Harila fight, we've done the Manny Akpan fight. Might have to start throwing him against some of the bigger names at 145 pounds and seeing just how good this guy is. could be someone to keep an eye on. Definitely from a perspective, if you're watching MMA just for violence and knockouts, Samuel Bark could probably be your guy in 2023. I don't know how he'll fare against better grapplers. Orlando Wilson Prince is a bit of he's a good grappler, but not someone that we have a lot of tape on. So how does Bark do against more credible seasoned grapplers? I don't know. But definitely someone that could knock anyone out at 145 pounds without a shadow of a doubt. So I think all in all, it was a successful card for Cage Warriors. New Year's Eve cards are always fun. You know, MMA is built on these New Year's Eve events, especially with the emphasis on Japanese MMA in the early years of the sport. And Cage Warriors have had in the past really awesome New Year's Eve events. I'll remember this one for the theme of the comebacks, right? Of the feel good stories. Bukauskas, Darren Stewart, Shaj, Creasey, even though he lost, just knowing everything that he's been through in the last few years. There's definitely the comeback theme will stick with me. Chasen Blair's probably someone we're going to be talking about a lot, and Omiel Brown as well. Samuel Bark, Nathan Fletcher. I'll probably stick my neck out there. I don't know if it's me being reactionary, but I would argue that this is probably the best Cage Warriors year, probably for the last, I want to say 6 or 7 years. The cards in Italy, or the card in Italy, sorry, the card in Northern Ireland, the Reese McKee Burlinson fight, the Vucenic and Paul Hughes rematch. There were so many insane moments. Judo Jim winning the belt. These really emotional moments. I think this was the first year where you really feel like it's not just a regional thing with Cage Warriors. There really is talent here. Guys that can transition very well to the upper echelons of MMA. Your UFCs, your Bellators, your PFLs. There's a lot of talent that's being churned out in Cage Warriors, and it's becoming more than just a regional promotion. You're always going to fall into these matchmaking scenarios where you're going to have the prospect against the can, for a lack of a better term, not to disrespect some of the guys on this card, your like Elio Hernandez and Guillermo Cadena, but you are going to have that with Cage Warriors. But I think this year's proven that there can be competitive fights in the regional scene. You can put belts on the line, and the belts actually mean something and have some resonance with the MMA community. And I think it was a successful 2022 for Cage Warriors, and a good way to end the year, I would say. I think the organization should be proud of themselves for how they went about this year. It's not been easy for many promotions to bounce back from COVID and all of the restrictions. It took Cage Warriors a while to get back. The trilogy events in 2020, 2021 were awesome, were very, very handy for the organization. I think they've bossed it this year with the events at the Indigo. And like I said, going to Rome and Northern Ireland. They're going to Ireland in 2023, which is going to be really exciting. So much talent, which we're going to cover moving forward. But I guess that's it for this episode, guys. If you enjoyed it, feel free to follow the Yellow Gloves podcast on Twitter. It's Yellow Gloves Pod. Also on Instagram, Yellow Gloves Pod as well. It's interesting with a podcast like this. If there aren't any cards, there won't be a crazy amount of content. But I want to do a lot of fighter breakdowns, a lot of history pieces, looking back at older events, at fighters who have just joined the UFC, and kind of providing a breakdown where possible, right? So if you did enjoy, feel free to leave some feedback. It's going to be available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So if you want to leave a review, that will also be super handy. Tweet me if you enjoyed it. Tweet me if you hated it. Feedback is very much encouraged. And thank you for listening.